If I'm an equilibrium head, then what this means is that I'm always going to be looking down on anyone who isn't like me. I'm either going to be looking down on them in a subtle way, so subtle that I myself don't know about it. That's if I'm kind of civilized. Or I'm looking down on people in an unsubtle way, which is something that's very familiar to us. It's like either I'm laughing at someone, or maybe I'm picking on them and they're making their life a misery. But that's not subtle. But it's the same thing as the subtle type of attitude that we do have, even when we're trying very hard to be on an equal footing with everyone else, which naturally, when we think about it, we want to do that. We don't want to be prejudiced or biased in any way, because that's obviously crap. So we try very hard not to be. By equilibrium head, what I mean is, whenever we adapt to the group's way of thinking so fully that we forget that it's the group's way of thinking and it becomes the only way of thinking that there is, then that's an equilibrium state. So you could say that when that happens, we're equilibrium heads. That's not to say that we shouldn't be unfamiliar with consensus realities, or we shouldn't be able to be adapted to them to a certain degree, so that we can dip into them and dip out of them if we want. That's obviously necessary. But at the same time, there's a threshold. There's this point where we get adapted, and all of a sudden the process develops a mind of its own, and it rushes to its conclusion, which is the state of 100% adaptation. The state of 100% adaptation is where the system, the equilibrium system that we've adapted to, now defines everything about us. And once that happens, because the system's also defining our ability to conceptualize or understand or relate to the world, this kind of thing happens, that the consensus reality stops being a way of looking at things and becomes the way. And when it happens that we do get 100% adapted like that, which is pretty much what always happens, then we're missing out. Obviously, we're missing out because we're accepting some paltry little equilibrium state in place of reality itself, which is not an equilibrium state. So an equilibrium state is very limited in what can happen within it. The only stuff that can happen within it is the stuff that is sanctified by the rules that govern that equilibrium state. So that's like an extreme dictatorship where all the populace can do nothing else but think and act in the way that the state wants them to, which is an absolutely comically hollow situation, because everyone's just aping something. No one's being true to themselves. Everyone's just aping the official line on things. And so nobody actually gets to exist as themselves. Everyone becomes a mouthpiece of the system. There are very few instances of dictatorships that are as thorough as that, because we always find ways of rebelling, and that's what keeps us sane, that's what keeps us alive, that's what keeps the spark going. But society is a different thing, because we can't label it as an appalling dictatorship that we have to fight against. No one sees the social equilibrium like that. And yet it is. Once we get 100% adapted to it, it becomes our enemy at that point, because it's absolutely putting a block on our growth, as I've said before. And the reason it's putting a block on our growth is because growth now equals deviance. And for the most part, we want to be approved of. We don't want to be labelled as deviant, so that keeps us within the fold. Also, in practical terms, it's not great to be labelled as a deviant. Other people can pick on you and beat the crap out of you, or they can just take the piss out of you the whole time and be disparaging and demeaning and just not take you seriously because you're not part of the club properly. And that's even worse. It's not great to have the crap beaten out of you, fair enough, but to be consistently treated as someone who doesn't count goes one stage again. It's the denying of who we are, of our individuality. We're being totally denied, and the only way we're ever going to stop being denied is when we cop on and be what everyone else wants us to be, what the consensus wants us to be. So we really have got a problem when we're equilibrium heads, because no matter how we try, we're going to think our way is the best way. Even if we try and kind of rationalize it and say, other ways are good too, that's fine, I respect them. We can't genuinely say that. It is always going to be a posture, albeit a posture that's meant for the best reasons, and we're trying to be fair and non-judgmental. So in other words, to be an equilibrium head, to have no other way oneself of looking at the world, means that one is always prejudiced. And that's just another way of saying that the adapted self, the socialized self, is always toxic. There is always toxicity there, because we're always looking down on people who aren't like us. Which, when you put it as bluntly as that, if I look down and sneer at someone because they're not exactly the same as me, they don't have the same beliefs, or they don't wear the same type of hat or whatever, it's obviously laughable. I mean, it's laughable towards me because I'm obviously such a ridiculous plonker to think that unless people are like me, I have to laugh at them and disparage them. I mean, the ego is always like that anyway. The ego can't help be like that. It can make a club with other egos of a similar ilk, and then that's all like one big ego. But that one big ego is pretty toxic as well, very toxic. And the mechanics are set in motion by this failure, by our failure to stick up for ourselves, or what's really true, our failure to go our own way. We can do that, but the result of that, the mechanics that are set in motion, are inevitably produce bad stuff, suffering, aggression, meanness of spirit, all sorts of crap stuff comes about from that. So we don't get away with it. We get our hands dirty that way. We get contaminated by the common ill. So the reason I'm going into this is because when it comes to working with people who are suffering from anxiety or depression or whatever condition, this becomes a big problem, because we can't help looking down on the people that we're supposed to be helping, unless, of course, we have some way of seeing the world, unless we're not entirely defined by the consensus viewpoint, which we always do tend to be defined by that. That's where our sense of security comes from, cozying up to everyone else and seeing things in the same way, and proving that we do, and proving that we're improving our team spirit in a type of a way. So in the world of mental health care, there is this thing going on that no matter how good-hearted and good-intentioned we are, if we're equilibrium thinkers, if we're 100% socialized, and there's nothing of us apart from what society has put in there, nothing of us, then we're always going to be looking upon people with mental health problems as being wrong, basically. I think it's wrong to be like that. No one will ever say that, but there is this sense that, well, here's something that we need to clear up, we need to fix up, we need to get you, we need to get you back again. We need to correct you. And of course, when I'm suffering from anxiety or depression or whatever the condition is, I very much want to be fixed. I see myself as being suffering from a pathology of some sort and needing to be fixed. I want to be. Generally speaking, I want nothing more than to get back to the way I was before I started suffering from whatever condition it was. Or if I was always suffering from it, then I still want nothing more than to be like everyone else, just to be like they are without this problem. And so we have to respect that. But at the same time, it is helpful. If I'm suffering from a mental health condition, it's helpful for me to meet mental health professions that don't look upon, that aren't in some very subtle kind of a way looking down on me because I have got a mental health condition. And that's awful. It sounds awful because we're going to say, well, of course I don't. Every bit of me wants to help people and do the right thing and be supportive. And I acknowledge that is true, but we still are looking at things from an equilibrium point of view, which means that the state of being of the person we're working with is being conceptualized on some level as an error that needs to be corrected. And that's fundamental. People will probably not disagree with that because they'll say, of course, it's an error. It's not a good thing. You're not enjoying suffering from this particular mental health condition. So obviously it's an error. But that's lazy thinking, really. Just because I'm not enjoying going through something doesn't mean that the process of me going through it is completely meaningless. It could be very meaningful. It could be it could be the most meaningful thing in my life. Not that I would know it at the time. And still, I would absolutely be going through hell and hating every minute of it and really, really wishing that I wasn't. But that doesn't mean that if I am the mental health worker, that I can't have in me respect for the process that's going on, because I see the process not in terms of an error with respect to the equilibrium values, but an example of how things change when change comes upon us. Profound change, it comes through suffering. It is born through suffering. And because it's suffering, we go through it unwillingly. But that does not mean that it is a pathology which is wholly without any value at all. The trouble is, of course, that we absolutely do see mental health conditions as aberration from a norm that need to be corrected for. I would say that it's very, very rare, pretty rare, to meet people who see it in another way, that there's actually something almost honourable about going through the suffering, even though we don't want to, and even though we don't see it as being honourable. There is something honourable in undergoing something which is a very real process and meaningful process and very, very challenging, as opposed to the everyday humdrum existence, which we reward ourselves in a way for being in, because we say, yes, I'm living life as we're supposed to and everything's good, but it isn't really, because I'm not actually growing, I'm just treading water. So it can be seen that when I am going through a crisis or a really difficult time, that could be a more real part of my life. Hard though that is to argue. If you're talking to someone who is going through extremes of suffering, because, as I've said, they're not interested usually, so it's a rare person who is interested. Well, it's a rare person who can also have that understanding that maybe the process itself is healthy, because we're told on all sides, or led to believe, given messages on all sides, that you need to be fixed in one way or another. So this is a hard point to argue, because if somebody's life has become nothing more than wall-to-wall suffering with anxiety or depressing, it's hard to argue that this isn't a problem that needs fixing in that mechanical way. But we have to say that anyway. One, because it can't be fixed in this way, even though that's a fantasy we all cling to. That fixing part of the thing, oh yes, you're going to be fixed, you're going to be cured of this condition, isn't really true. Now, in some cases where there's only a degree of neuroticism, we can go back to how we were before. Probably not quite the same, but we can. But then in that case, it is still true that we have missed out on the opportunity that challenge gave us to actually change in a radical way. And of course we could say, well, why the hell should I change in a radical way? I don't want to. What's wrong with me the way I am? It's a bit offensive, really, to suggest that I need to change in a radical way. I mean, what's that saying about me? It's a funny kind of thing, that it's not that, oh, you have to change in a radical way. It's just that if we deny the process that's going on in all of us, which is radical change, which is growth, we're going to be stuck. And no matter what we do, no matter what our circumstances, on a certain level, we're going to be miserable and unfulfilled. That's just the way it goes. There's the two things. There's risk at one side, and there's zero risk, i.e. safety, on the other. The default is to have our target hairs over safety and navigate in that direction, gravitate in that direction, pulled in by the lure of security. Society offers that lure because it offers us the security of knowing that we're living life in the right way. If we do that, then although we avoid the short-term uncomfortableness of challenges, our life becomes progressively less meaningful and there's less flavour in it, because that's the way the principle works. The more I risk, the more I am. The less I risk, the less I am. If I risk nothing, I am nothing. And yet risking is against the grain, so that is the basic principle. Now often it can happen that what we call neurotic mental illness, maybe it always happens because of this, is because we have headed for safety. I dare say no psychotherapist is going to object to that sweeping statement at all. Neurotic mental illness, as it used to be called, mental health conditions, as you should call it now, is due to the fact that we've gravitated towards the lure. And the thing about the lure, it's like a siren, it calls to us, but the thing about a siren calling to us is, yeah, it's very alluring, but also, if we go along with it, we'll end up shipwrecked on the rocks, and then the sirens will eat us, because that's what they do. They're not really trying to be friendly. They might sing nicely, but that doesn't mean they're going to be friends with us. So that's an important thing to remember. So things that sing to us nicely and sound nice to us and look nice to us, it's not necessarily our friend, and that's very much true with ontological security, the security of joining the group, the security of thinking like the group. We do have to do that in order to cooperate, but if we lose ourselves in it, then we're in very serious trouble, whether we know it or not, and we probably don't know it. But just talking about this in relation to working in mental health, it is pretty much universal that we don't see the potential value. And I won't see the value because it's not like a fairy story where everyone who develops a mental health condition goes through a crisis and changes in a good way as a result. The whole thing is a risk. As I've said, it doesn't mean that, oh yes, we do this and then this wonderful expansion of our being is going to happen. In a way, we can say yes, that it absolutely will, if we take it on the chin and if we go through it and don't invest in trying to avoid or turning our back on the process that's actually happening to us. So, as they say, as one lady I know says, it either makes you bitter or it makes you better, talking about great difficulty. So it's not to say when really hard things happen to us that we're going to become better. We could get bitter instead. So that's the important thing for us to kind of dwell on. And bitterness can come about because of our perception that this is a wholly negative thing that's happening to us, a wholly pathological thing. Because once we fixate on that, obviously that's going to make us pretty bitter in whatever particular way, whatever particular flavour of bitterness that is. And even when we try to be more empowering to people passing through the mental health system, we're still not getting it. And an example of that for me is the term recovery. So recovery is used a lot where I work. Recovery is used a lot, and it sounds good. It sounds great. It's like if someone's got really sick, it's patting them on the shoulder and saying, "It's okay. You're going to recover. You'll recover from this. You're just sick or something." So in that way, the word recovery is good. But we really do have to understand that there isn't a direct parallel between getting a physical health condition and a mental health condition. With a physical health condition, if I've got a high temperature, or my blood sugars are out, or something about me is out, I've got too much, not enough of the hormone that gives us energy, thyroxine, then I really do need to normalize again. That's it. Going further and further away from base is not going to be good. Getting hotter and hotter or colder and colder is not going to be good. So in physical health, it really is about equilibria. And we really are sticking to those equilibria because the body's equilibria. Either you stick to them or you die, basically. That's what it means to be a biological entity. We've got all these equilibria going on that have to be adhered to very, very accurately. That's how we stay alive. We don't do it consciously for the most part, but our body does it for us. But treating something like anorexia or addiction or depression or anxiety or OCD as if it is a bad case of maybe dysentery, that we'll get back on our feet again, it really just doesn't wash. And what's more, it is demeaning and dismissive of the whole experience, because it is implying that the whole point is to get back to how we were before, to recover. Oh, I'm recovered now, thank you very much. So that's a particular way of looking at it. And in that way of looking at it, when we do indeed recover and go back to how we were before, that's the best outcome possible. That's what we're all hoping for and rooting for. But that really isn't the opportunity that is being offered to us when we are majorly challenged. The opportunity that is being offered to us is the opportunity to change, to grow, to become quite different from the way that we are or were. It's like a diving board. We dive off it. It's an opportunity for growth. As I said at the beginning, growth always happens through pain. Pain and growth are inseparable. So we cannot condemn and pathologize pain without also condemning and pathologizing growth, without actually saying that we're doing that, but that's what we're doing. We're in a society that values static identities, yet the static identity is a prison. Okay, thanks for watching.